The command capsule had been completely redesigned. The mission, extensive Earth orbit evaluation of the command service module, was crucial to American confidence. The commander was Wally Schirra. Don Isley was the command module pilot, and although no lunar module was attached, Walter Cunningham's official designation was Lunar Module Pilot. A veteran of both Mercury and Gemini, Wally Schirra was the only astronaut to fly all three programs.
5, 4, ignition, GR.
In the Apollo program, Walt and Don Isley and I had to pick up after losing the three men on the launch pad, and it was a tough one. We had to make the spacecraft work. I had announced before the flight, not many people remember that I was leaving the space program because I had no other flight scheduled I could see in the future.
The object of Apollo 7 was to perform all of the checkout of all the spacecraft systems and fly a mission that hopefully would be of a duration as long as the longest planned lunar landing, which was 11 days. And I have to tell you that the spacecraft was fantastic. We had no real problems. It was good enough so we could commit Apollo 8 on a flight around the moon. It did go 11 days. I think to this day it's probably the most ambitious first flight of any new spacecraft, and it came through with flying colors.
If Schirra harbored fears that the project would be canceled, he helped dispel them with the crew's efforts and with the pronouncement that Apollo 7 was a first-class spacemobile. Tests included 8 burns of the propulsion system. All were perfect, textbook operations. A distinctive feature introduced during Apollo 7 was live telecasts from space. These broadcasts would become important to Americans during the missions that followed. The crew received a special Emmy Award for their first practical television transmissions from space.
Roger. Good morning to everyone in television land. You're looking at the right-hand portion of the main display console. In the upper left-hand portion of your view, you would see the instruments that has to do with the cryogenics that are used to power the fuel cells and provide breathing oxygen to the spacecraft.
Originally, Apollo 8 was to be a second Earth orbit test using a new Saturn series rocket, the 36-story tall Saturn V. Its 3 stages had almost 5.5 times the thrust of Apollo 7's rocket, and the liftoff subjected the astronauts to increased stress and vibration.
You have these giant engines down there gimbling, 1.5 million pounds of thrust, flicking themselves back and forth like a sort of a garden hose you're riding up into space. We're at the end of a 360-foot vehicle. Think of it not as a big rigid hunk like the Washington Monument, but more like a whip antenna on an automobile. So at the top, we were really being thrown around. And basically, during the first 10 or 15 seconds, we could not speak to each other, and we couldn't hit a switch on the instrument panel if we had to because of the motion.
Given the success of the previous flight and the fact that U.S. military intelligence had heard rumors that the Russians were ready to go to the moon, NASA decided to proceed with a lunar orbit. Apollo 8 journeyed to within 60 miles of the moon's surface and circled it 10 times. Anders, Jim Lovell, and mission commander Frank Borman became the first humans to see the moon firsthand and to view the entire Earth from space. Although the Soviets had fired several unmanned probes at the moon and had even landed one on the surface, they were nowhere near sending human beings. Apollo 8 entered orbit 3 days out, on Christmas Eve, 1968. That night, as a greeting to Earth from more than 220,000 miles away, the crew took turns reading the creation story from the book of Genesis. First Anders, then Lovell, then Borman. 1 billion people in 64 countries tuned in radios and television sets.
We were told about 6 weeks before the flight that we would have a television performance on Christmas Eve, which would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice. And the only instructions that our government gave us at this time was to do something appropriate. And frankly, it was an annoyance to me. I don't know how it was to Bill, but we weren't really excited about doing something appropriate. We asked some friends what they might suggest, and a friend of ours named Cy Borgen, who was a very gifted individual who lives in Washington, came back with a suggestion that it might be appropriate, if we felt like it, to read from Genesis. And that's how it all happened. It wasn't pre-planned. It was pre-planned from about 3 weeks before the flight, but I didn't give 30 seconds thought to it. It just turned out that Cy Borgen was a much more sensitive intellectual than I thought he was, and I think it struck the tone for the whole mission.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
And the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day.
And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
For the return trip, Apollo 8 had to establish a critical burn on the far side of the moon, out of radio contact. At 19 minutes after midnight on Christmas Day, Jim Lovell reestablished communications with Mission Control in Houston, Texas. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus, Lovell reported. Apollo 8 began a safe and successful voyage home.
Apollo 8 was what the spirit of Apollo was all about. Apollo program primarily was intended to demonstrate that man could leave the planet Earth. And Apollo 8 was the first craft to do that in all history. And the job that Jim and his colleagues Frank Borman and Bill Anders did on that flight was, I think, one of the major high points of all the history of flight.
At first glance, Apollo 9 may have seemed a regression, returning to an Earth orbit mission after an impressive flight around the moon. The goal of this flight was to test the Lunar Excursion Module, or LEM, and make sure all the components of the Apollo craft worked in harmony. Also important was an EVA, the first for Apollo. Leading the mission was Jim McDivitt, who had overseen the development and construction of the LEM. David Scott piloted the command module, and lunar module pilot Russell Schweikert performed double duty as a spacewalker. For the first time, the command and lunar modules received names from their crew. The command module was christened Thumbdrop, the LEM Spider.
The one I flew, Apollo 9, was called the D mission. It was the first flight of the lunar module. It was an Earth orbit mission like Waltz. We checked out all the things in the lunar module. It was a lot of fun. The lunar module is a very flimsy spacecraft, unlike all the models which show it to be very tough looking. It's really made out of cellophane and Scotch tape, and I'm not exaggerating, and the material in the lunar module is so thin that if on the Earth, if you dropped something like a screwdriver or something, go right through the floor.
The other objective of Apollo 9 was a spacewalk, complete with a test of the lunar spacesuit and backpack. Although Schweikert experienced a touch of motion sickness prior to the EVA, the trial run went on without a hitch.
Okay, Dave, come on out.
Okay. I'm going to let the camera run here. Taking pictures of everybody taking pictures.
Yeah, you want to